They thought death was the worst that could happen. They were wrong. In a quiet village nestled at the edge of a fertile valley, life seemed simple, almost peaceful. Children laughed in the streets, women prepared meals, and the men, brave warriors, polished their swords, unaware that their world was about to shatter. Smoke on the horizon hinted at approaching danger, but none of them could imagine the nightmare heading their way. The Ottoman army was coming. Hundreds of soldiers, their banners glinting in the sun, marched with cold precision. Stories had spread of villages swallowed by fire and families torn apart. But the villagers clung to hope. Surely, they thought, their courage, their loyalty could save them. But hope can be a cruel illusion. The battle began just before sunrise. Steel clashed, arrows pierced the morning sky, and screams filled the valley. The villagers fought valiantly, but the Ottomans were organized, relentless, and merciless. One by one, defenders fell. Husbands trying to protect their wives, fathers shielding their children, they all faced the same terrifying truth. They were outmatched. By midday, the village lay in ruins. Homes burned, the air thick with smoke and the metallic scent of blood. Survivors stumbled through the wreckage, their hearts pounding, their minds numb. And then the soldiers arrived. The men who survived the fighting were executed or taken away. But the women, the wives, mothers, daughters, faced a fate far worse than death. Their husbands were gone. Their children were terrified and helpless. And now, they too were prisoners, completely at the mercy of a merciless empire. The women were forced to leave everything behind: their homes, their belongings, their lives. Marching through the scorched valley, each step weighed heavy with fear and disbelief. Whispers spread among them, rumors of what awaited inside the Ottoman palaces. Some said it was a life of servitude. Others whispered about harems and the Sultan's court. The stories were terrifying, but the truth would be even worse. And yet, there was no turning back. As the sun set over the ruined village, the women were marched toward a destiny they could not escape. Their minds raced with questions. Would they survive? Would they ever see their homes again? Could anyone endure what was coming? For the wives of defeated warriors, the battle was over. But the nightmare had only just begun. Death, they would soon learn, might have been the kinder fate. And now, the journey begins. A journey into a world where freedom is a memory and suffering becomes a new reality. Could you survive what they went through? Think about that as we follow their story. The village was gone. Smoke still curled from the ruined homes. The men were gone, and the women, those who had survived the battle, were left trembling, huddled together, facing a fate worse than they could ever imagine. The Ottoman soldiers didn't give them time to mourn. Orders were sharp and unyielding. The women were rounded up, their hands tied, their eyes wide with terror. Children clung to their mothers, crying. But there was no room for mercy, no time for compassion, only obedience. The march began at dusk. Along the rough, uneven roads, the captives were forced to walk for miles. Some stumbled, exhausted and dehydrated, only to be pulled back by the soldiers' cruel hands. Others whispered prayers, hoping the gods would intervene. But there was no answer. The landscape blurred past, forests, rivers, and hills, but nothing could shield them from what was coming. Along the way, rumors spread among the captives. Stories of women who had entered the Ottoman palaces before them, wives of defeated warriors, daughters of rebel leaders, told of lives stripped of freedom. Some whispered of harems where women were watched day and night, trained to serve, groomed to please, and trapped in golden cages of marble and velvet. Others spoke of families never reunited, of women forced to forget who they were, to abandon everything they had loved. Fear turned to despair. Mothers clutched their children closer. Sisters held each other's hands as if sheer human contact could shield them from the horrors that awaited. Every step was heavier than the last. Every glance at the soldiers' cold faces reminded them that resistance meant pain, or worse. And yet, even in the darkness, the women's minds raced. Some dared to dream of escape. Others clung to memories of home, believing that somehow they could survive this nightmare. But the truth was inescapable. Their lives were no longer theirs to control. Days passed, or maybe weeks. The captives lost all sense of time. Food and water were scarce, and exhaustion gnawed at their bodies. And finally, the distant silhouette of a great city appeared on the horizon. The domes of palaces glimmered in the sun. The walls towered over the streets like silent judges, promising safety for some and unimaginable torment for others. The women didn't know it yet, but their journey was only beginning. Inside those walls awaited a life they could never imagine. Golden cages, whispered orders, and the constant reminder that they were now pawns in a game far larger than themselves. The Ottomans did not simply conquer lands, they conquered people, minds, bodies, and souls. And as the gates of the city drew near, a single thought echoed in every terrified heart. What horrors await us inside? For the wives of defeated warriors, freedom was gone. Their journey into the unknown had begun, and the nightmare was far from over. Could you survive what's coming? Think about that. Because next, we enter the walls of the Ottoman palace, and nothing will ever be the same. The gates of the Ottoman palace loomed above them, massive and cold, like the mouth of a beast ready to swallow them whole. The women had walked for days, weary, frightened, and broken, but nothing could have prepared them for what awaited beyond those walls. As the massive doors creaked open, a silence fell over the captives. The courtyard was vast, paved with polished stone that reflected the harsh sunlight. Soldiers patrolled the grounds, their eyes sharp, their expressions unreadable. The women were herded inside, their movements restricted, their freedom gone with every step. It was a world unlike anything they had known. Marble columns soared above them. Gardens bloomed, not for beauty, but as a silent display of power. The air smelled of incense and authority, and every corner of the palace seemed alive with eyes that watched them, measured them, judged them. The women were separated from their children, cries and pleas echoing in the marble halls. Mothers tried to hold on, but the soldiers were unyielding. One by one, families were torn apart. The children were sent to distant quarters, and the women were pushed further into the palace, deeper into its labyrinth of hallways, rooms, and hidden chambers. They were introduced to the harem, the place every whisper had warned them about. At first, it appeared beautiful, almost enchanting. Silk curtains, soft cushions, ornate lanterns casting golden light. But beneath the opulence lurked a hidden terror. The harem was a cage, gilded yet inescapable. Each woman was watched constantly. Every gesture, every word, every glance was noted. Disobedience was punished. Resistance was crushed. And the constant presence of the Sultan's guards left no room for hope. Some women were chosen to serve in the inner courts, others to clean, cook, or wait on influential visitors. It didn't matter what their skills or past lives were. Here, they had no identity, no family, no choice. They were prisoners, not of bars, but of rules, rituals, and relentless observation. Fear and despair settled over them like a heavy fog. Some cried quietly in corners, mourning what had been stolen. Others steeled themselves, trying to appear calm, knowing survival meant hiding every ounce of fear. And yet, even in the shadows, whispers passed between them. Stories of women who had survived, who had found ways to manipulate their captors, or even rise within the palace. But such stories were rare, and they carried a heavy cost. The reality hit like a hammer. Death would have been mercy. Here, in the heart of the empire, The women were trapped in a gilded nightmare. Every day would test their courage, their sanity, and their very souls. And as the evening sun dipped behind the palace towers, casting long shadows across the courtyards, a chilling truth became clear. Their lives were no longer theirs. They were pawns in a world of power, fear, and control. Could they survive this? Could they retain even a fragment of themselves? We uncover how some women began to navigate this deadly world, and how the Ottoman harem could turn hope into a weapon. The women had survived the battle, the march, and the gates of the palace, but survival was only the beginning. Inside the harem, a different kind of horror awaited. It was not the clash of swords that threatened them now, but the slow, unrelenting erosion of their freedom, their identity, and their will. At first, the harem seemed like a palace of dreams. Soft cushions, fragrant oils, and golden lanterns that cast flickering light over marble floors. But beauty here was a trap. Every corner was watched. Every smile, every whisper, every glance could bring punishment. Guards and overseers were everywhere, reminding the women that they were no longer masters of their own fate. The hierarchy inside the harem was strict and cruel. Some women were chosen to serve directly in the inner courts, groomed to catch the attention of powerful men. Others were assigned endless chores, cleaning, cooking, waiting on visitors. Disobedience was not tolerated. Even small mistakes could lead to beatings, isolation, or worse. Psychological torment became as real as physical. The women were stripped of names, told to adopt titles or be called by numbers. Letters from home were forbidden. News of family was scarce and often false. Isolation gnawed at them, and the constant presence of watchful eyes ensured that no comfort, no solidarity could survive for long. Yet, amid this darkness, survival demanded cunning. Some women learned the subtle art of obedience, of appearing meek while observing every weakness of those around them. They watched the favored women, noting the ways influence could be gained, power quietly seized. Rumors of secret alliances, whispered deals, and the Sultan's attention became currency in a place where life was fragile. But for many, fear overwhelmed strategy. Nights were the hardest. Quiet hours when memories of home, of husbands and children, crashed into their minds. The walls of the palace felt suffocating. Sleep brought dreams of freedom, and waking brought the stark reality. They were trapped in a gilded cage, watched, measured, and manipulated. Some women tried to resist silently, refusing to speak to overseers or pretending illness to avoid service. Others broke under the weight of constant pressure, crying in corners where no one could see. Every day, the harem reminded them of what they had lost: family, safety, and the simple life they once knew. And yet, the human spirit is difficult to extinguish. Even in this world of gold and fear, some began to adapt, finding ways to navigate the rules, manipulate favor, and survive. But each small victory came with a price. A piece of their soul, a fragment of who they once were, slowly chipped away. By the time the women realized the full extent of their new reality, it was clear life in the harem was worse than death. Every moment was a test of endurance, cunning, and resilience. Freedom was gone, replaced by a nightmare dressed in silk and jewels. We'll see how the Ottomans used these women as weapons in politics and power, how being chosen could be both a curse and a deadly game. Life inside the harem was cruel, but it was about to become even more dangerous. The women soon discovered that their value was not only in their beauty or obedience, but in their usefulness to power. They were no longer just captives. They were pawns in a game they could never win. The Ottoman Empire was vast, and every conquest, every rebellion, and every alliance was played out not just on battlefields, but behind palace walls. Wives of defeated warriors, daughters of enemies, women from distant lands, They were bargaining chips in a world where influence could be bought with a smile or stolen with a whispered secret. Some women were selected to be gifts for powerful officials, sent to secure loyalty or cement alliances. Others were groomed to catch the attention of the Sultan himself. Being chosen could bring privileges, better food, softer beds, or a fleeting sense of security. But it was a trap. Each favor came at a cost. The price was obedience, submission, and the surrender of the self. Rumors spread quickly through the harem. Some whispered of women who rose to influence, advising powerful men or quietly controlling palace decisions. Others told tales of women who fell from favor, punished for jealousy, disobedience, or simply the wrong glance at the wrong time. The line between survival and destruction was razor thin. Fear became second nature. Every step, every word, every gesture was measured. Friends could become enemies. Alliances formed and dissolved overnight. Trust was dangerous, and betrayal was constant. In this gilded cage, even hope could be deadly. The psychological games were relentless. Women were pitted against each other, competing for attention, favor, or protection. The harem was not merely a home, it was a battlefield, where intellect, charm, and cunning were weapons, and mistakes could be fatal. Some learned to manipulate the system, whispering secrets to gain advantage, subtly undermining rivals while keeping guards unaware. Others were crushed, their spirits broken under the weight of fear and deprivation. And then came the Sultan's attention. Being summoned to the inner court could feel like an honor, but it often meant being trapped, observed, and used for political or personal gain. Every glance, every action, every word could decide life or misery. Some women tried to please, some tried to resist, but few could ever control what happened next. Through it all, one terrifying truth became clear. Their lives were no longer theirs. Every choice, every emotion, every dream had to be measured against survival. In this world, death might have been mercy, but life was a constant test of courage, cunning, and endurance. We will reveal the most horrifying fates of these women. The emotional torment, the isolation, and the crushing reality of being trapped in a world where freedom was impossible. By now, the women understood the truth. Freedom was gone, and death, in comparison, might have been mercy. Inside the harem, every day was a battle, not with swords, but with fear, manipulation, and despair. Some women were trapped in isolation, confined to small chambers with only the faintest light filtering through barred windows. Days stretched endlessly. Nights were worse. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant laughter or cries of other prisoners. Memories of home, of husbands and children, became both comfort and torment, haunting their dreams and shattering their waking hours. Others faced relentless scrutiny and psychological torment. They were watched constantly by guards and palace officials, their actions measured, their words dissected. A misstep, a glance too long, a whisper shared with another woman, could result in punishment. Beatings were not always physical. Shame, humiliation, and constant intimidation were far more effective in breaking the spirit. For the women chosen by the Sultan or high-ranking officials, the torment was even more personal. What seemed like privilege was often a gilded trap. They were forced to perform, to please, to anticipate desires they had never known existed. Their identities were stripped away, replaced by roles dictated by those in power. Friendships were forbidden, loyalties tested, and trust became a weapon used against them. Some women tried to resist. They whispered plans, hid letters, or plotted quiet rebellion. But the harem was designed to crush such defiance. Informers lurked everywhere, and even a single careless word could end a life, or worse, bring endless suffering. Every act of courage came at a price. Over time, many women changed. They adapted to survive, learning to mask fear with calm, grief with smiles, obedience with cunning. But survival came at a cost. Every day chipped away at their humanity. The laughter of children, the warmth of a husband's embrace, the freedom of walking freely through their village, all became memories that haunted them relentlessly. And still, the empire demanded more. Women were exchanged, gifted, or repositioned to serve political goals. Some rose to influence, gaining power within the palace hierarchy. But for most, the harem remained a prison of endless trials, where comfort was fleeting and terror constant. By the time the women realized the full scope of their fates, it was too late. Their lives had been rewritten by conquest, ambition, and cruelty. What the Ottoman Empire had taken from them was not just their freedom, but their very sense of self. For the wives of defeated warriors, life inside the harem was worse than death. Every day was a reminder that survival required sacrifices their hearts could scarcely bear. And even in survival, they were never free. We will reflect on their legacy, how history remembers these women, and the lessons of resilience, tragedy, and power that echo through time. The battles were over, the villages burned, and the Sultan's power unchallenged. But the story of the wives of defeated warriors did not end with the fall of their homes or the gates of the Ottoman palace. Their lives, their suffering, and their endurance left a mark on history that few have truly understood. For these women, survival was not just a test of body, but of mind and spirit. Many spent decades in the harem, living under constant surveillance, navigating politics and cruelty, and enduring the psychological torment of a gilded prison. Some learned to manipulate the system, gaining small freedoms, influence, or even wealth, but at a profound personal cost. Each step toward power meant surrendering fragments of their identity, pieces of their humanity stolen by a system designed to dominate completely. Others never adapted. Some quietly faded into the shadows, their lives consumed by grief and despair. Letters home, if they survived, were censored. Children born in captivity were often separated from mothers, continuing the cycle of loss. Entire families were erased from memory, leaving only whispers of their existence. History remembers the empire's victories, the conquests, the battles, the power of the Sultan, but rarely does it remember the women behind the conquered lands. Yet their suffering was immense, their courage remarkable. In surviving the unimaginable, they bore witness to the cost of conquest in the most personal and devastating way possible. Their legacy is a lesson in resilience and tragedy. They endured the horrors of a world ruled by power, manipulation, and fear. They adapted, resisted, and sometimes survived, but always at the expense of their freedom, their families, and their former lives. For generations, these women have been remembered only in fragments, stories passed down quietly, often overshadowed by the grand narrative of empires, and yet, their story is not just about pain, it is about survival. Even in the harshest conditions, even when stripped of everything, these women endured. They were witnesses to history, unwilling participants in a system of cruelty, and examples of human resilience. Their experiences remind us that the cost of war and conquest is never counted in victories alone. It is etched in the lives of those who are forgotten. So, when we speak of empires, of battles, of sultans and soldiers, we must also remember the ones whose suffering was silent but profound. The wives of defeated warriors faced horrors worse than death. They endured captivity, manipulation, and loss on a scale that challenges comprehension. And in remembering them, we honor not only their pain, but their remarkable courage and endurance. Could you have survived what they went through? Their story is a haunting reminder of the human cost behind history's grandest conquests. This is the story of the wives of defeated warriors, trapped, silenced, and yet unforgettable.